They returned the ring the day her family lost everything. She walked out of that city with 2 trunks and a name nobody wanted. But her dead uncle left her something they never expected. 400 acres, on the Alpha King's border, an ancient law. 12 months to find an Alpha protector, or lose it all. A rival king with rings from every Omega he buried. And a widowed Alpha King, who buried the last woman he loved beneath a nameless stone. He rode out to send her home. He found her splitting wood in a ruined velvet cloak. She never looked up, poisoned well, a moonless raid, a wraith storm swallowing the sky, an arrow drawn by hands they called soft. I did not come here to be saved. The morning came cold to the western reach of Ironvale. The kind of cold that put a rime on the horse's breath. The kind that warned a man in his bones before it warned him in his fingers. Torian Halver rode alone. His cloak was heavy wool the color of hammered iron. His crown he had left in the keep, because a king does not need a crown to be a king. Not when he is riding to tell an Omega, from the capital, that she does not belong on his border. He was 37. He had ruled Ironvale for 11 years. He had buried more good men than he had counted. And one woman, whose name he did not say out loud anymore, because saying it opened a door he could not close. He was riding to Ashwin Hold. He was riding to be kind. That was how he had framed it. Kind. A courtesy owed to a dead friend. Because Lord Bram Ashwin had held that frontier acreage for 40 long years. And Lord Bram had asked Torian once, plain and quiet, over ale in the small hours of a winter feast, to look in on the place, if anything ever happened to him. Something had happened. Spring fever. The messengers said the old man had gone in his sleep. The will had been read out in a Shenreach. The land had passed to a niece nobody in Ironvale had ever heard of. Sable Ashwin, 29, Omega, never once set foot on the frontier. Torian had heard enough. He told his steward he would ride out himself. Because plain speech was a kindness in these lands. Because a soft creature from the capital would break out here. And the honest thing was to say so before winter did the saying for him. That was the story he told himself. He believed it right up, until he crested the ridge above Ashwin Hold, and saw her. She was standing at the woodpile, in a velvet cloak, a Shenreach cut, ruined already, the kind of ruin that comes from 3 days of a woman doing work the cloak was never made for. She had an axe in her hand, not a hatchet, proper felling axe. And she was looking at a heap of unsplit pine rounds the way another woman might look at a knot she meant to untangle. Torian reined in at the gate. He watched her a beat longer than he meant to, because something in the way she stood was wrong for his story. Not wrong. Off. The way a cord is off. She did not look like a woman waiting to be rescued. She looked like a woman who had walked out into her own morning and found work to do. He rode down, dismounted slow, because a king does not hurry, and because he needed the extra seconds to remember the words he had come to say. Which was strange. He had said them the whole ride out. He said them now. Lady Ashwin. She looked up, steady, not startled. Your Grace, I will be plain with you. Plain speech is a kindness on this frontier. Please. This land is no place for a lady of a Shenreach. It has broken folk born to it. There is no shame in selling the acreage and going south. I will give you a fair price myself. You can be past the pass before the first snow. That was the speech. He had polished it on the ride. It was a good speech. It was, he believed, kind. She smiled. It was not an angry smile. It was not a hurt smile. It was the small, patient smile of a person who had heard a thing many times and had stopped bothering to argue with it. And then she did the thing that undid him. She bent. She set a round of pine on end. She swung. The axe came down clean and true. The round split in 2 halves that fell neat to either side. She set up another round. She split that one too. She set up a third. Torian Halver, Alpha King of Ironvale, watched an Omega in a ruined velvet cloak split 3 pine rounds in a row, without once looking up at him. And he did not know what to say, because the whole shape of his morning had just cracked. Have you ever ridden out to a place certain of what you would find, and discovered in the space of 30 seconds that you did not know a single thing about it? My Uncle Bram taught me to split wood when I was 9 years old, she said, between swings, not unkindly, as if she were telling a farmhand the time. He came out to the capital every few years. He always said an Omega, who could not warm her own house, had no business being cold. I have been splitting my own wood for 20 years, Your Grace. I did it in a courtyard behind our townhouse in Ashenreach. I will do it here. The wood does not know what kingdom I came from. She set another round. She split it. Torien opened his mouth and closed it, because the argument he had prepared had just been carried out and shot behind the barn. And he had no second argument, because he had not thought he would need one. 20 years. 20 years. He wrote to you every month for 20 years. She rested the axe head on the block, wiped a strand of hair from her cheek with the back of her wrist. I know the names of the creeks that feed the north pasture. I know why you tamp fence dirt in layers, and not all at once. I know a shadow wolf will not come to a fire that smells of juniper. I did not step off a coach 3 days ago and blink at this place, Your Grace. I chose it, with my eyes open, which is a very different thing from arriving soft and surprised. She said it without heat. That was the part that split him. If she had been proud, he could have argued proud. Proud, he understood. Proud, he could match. But this flat, patient laying out of the record, this was not defense. This was a woman announcing weather. He said the only thing left to him, which was the truth. I did not know. No, you did not. She looked at him then, really looked, and her eyes were gray. Gray the way the sky is gray when it is about to decide something. And she was not smiling anymore. She was not angry either. She was simply looking, the way an appraiser looks at a coin she is not yet sure about. Was there anything else, Your Grace? There was not. He said so. He mounted. And that was when the hoofbeats came up the road from the south. Not one horse. Not two. 6. Sable turned. Torien turned. And the man who rode at the head of that column was a man Torien knew too well. King Draven Morik, of Morika's Reach, his own eastern neighbor. A tall alpha, with a black beard oiled to a point, and rings on every finger of both hands. Rings that were mostly the wedding rings of dead Omegas, whose lands he had ended up holding. That was a rumor. Torien had never bothered to verify it, because Torien did not care to know the exact tally. Draven came down the lane at a trot, reined up short, bowed in the saddle. All courtesy, all teeth. Your Grace, what a happy accident. And Lady Ashwin, my condolences on your uncle. He was a giant of the border in his day. Thank you. I have ridden all the way from Morika's Reach to say so in person, and to bring a small proposal. If her ladyship will do me the courtesy of a hearing. Speak it here. His Grace of Ironvale can hear it too. That was sable. That was a decision. Torien noticed it. He filed it, because he had expected her to invite Draven into the hall and offer wine, and tremble a little at all those rings. She did none of those things. She kept her axe in her hand, head down, idle, like a woman resting between rounds. Except the axe was not the axe of a woman idle. It was the axe of a woman ready. Draven noticed too. Draven's smile got a shade tighter, but he was smooth. He had held Morika's Reach for 20 years by being smooth. Ashwin Hold is a hard piece of ground for a lady on her own. I would take it off your hands. Fair coin. Enough for a small townhouse in the capital and a servant or two. You go home to your own kind of life. The land goes to a hand that can hold it. Everyone wins. No. My lady. No, Your Grace. Thank you for the ride. Thank you for the courtesy. My answer is no. Draven let the silence sit, because silence was one of his tools. He used it well. He used it now. Then he smiled. And this time the smile was not smooth. It was thin. It was a smile that had lawyers behind it. You know the old law, of course. I do. Do you? An Omega who inherits a frontier holding, and has no alpha protector of record by the next convening of the Grand Council, loses the holding to the nearest sworn crown. Old Law, Chapter 4, Article 11. Draven blinked. Once. He had not expected the article number. Well recited. My uncle wrote it out for me, 10 years ago, in a letter. Then you know the Grand Council convenes at the end of harvest each year, which gives you, he tilted his head, doing the arithmetic in front of them like a man showing off, a little over 12 months, to find an alpha of standing willing to lay claim over you and your land, or to lose the land to whichever crown is closest. Which, geographically speaking, would be mine. That was where he looked at Torian. Just a flick, not a challenge, not yet, a measurement. Torian said nothing, because there was a thing Torian could have said in that moment. A simple thing. For words. I claim this land. Or 5. I claim this lady. Either would have shut Draven's mouth. Either would have ended it. Except claiming her would have made her his property in the eyes of the old law. Not his ally. Not his neighbor. His property. Her land, his land. Her herds, his herds. Her voice, his voice. Everything she had come out here to build, folded under his signet. And he had watched her split 3 rounds of pine, without looking up at him. And he could not do it to her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He did not have a word for the not yet. So he said nothing. He held Draven's flick of a look. And he let Sable answer. Thank you for the reminder of the old law, your grace. I will make my own arrangements before the council. Will you? I will. With respect, my lady. 12 months is not long. And alphas of standing do not queue at the gates of frontier holds. As a rule. As a rule. No. Then I renew my offer, for the last time, in good faith. And I refuse it, for the last time, in good faith. Draven bowed again. Same courtesy. Same teeth. Only now the teeth were a little more visible. He looked at Torian. Your grace. Pleasure. I trust we will see each other at council. We will. Ride safe. Ride safe. Draven wheeled. His column wheeled with him. In under a minute the 6 horses were dust on the road south. And Torian and Sable were left standing at the wood pile, as they had begun. Except everything was different now, because a clock had just started ticking, that neither of them had asked for. Sable set the axe against the block. Very careful. Very controlled. But Torian saw the tremor in her hand. Small. She was not made of stone. She was made of a will laid over a woman, who was still underneath, 29 and standing on a frontier alone. I should not have kept my helm off in his sight. He would have known you anyway. Yes. You handled him well. I handled him because my uncle told me exactly what he was. In a letter. 5 years ago. She let out a small breath. A shake of a laugh with no laugh in it. Uncle Bram wrote me about King Morik the way another uncle would write about a bad dog. Do not turn your back. Do not offer your hand. Do not accept his wine. I have been reading about that man for a third of my life, your grace. Torian mounted. Because it was the only thing left to do. Because if he stayed 1 minute more he would say the thing he had almost said. And once said it could not be unsaid. My lady. Your grace. I will look in again. You do not owe me that. I owe your uncle. She held his eye a moment. Gray on gray. Then she nodded. And she picked up her axe. And she set up another round. And she did not look up, as he rode away. He got as far as the ford. Then he stopped. He did not know why he stopped. He told himself he stopped to water the horse. Which was a lie. The horse had drunk enough at the hold. He stopped because his chest was not right. Because a thing had come loose in it back there at the wood pile, and he could not find where the loose thing was. He dismounted. He walked upstream. He walked the way he had walked 100 times in the last 5 years. Because there was a place upstream that he came to when a thing in his chest came loose, and he could not find where. Under the willow, on the low rise above the water, a small cairn of river stones. No name carved on it. He had not been able to carve the name, because carving the name had felt like closing a door on her, and the door had never fully closed. And he had not made himself close it. But what Sable Ashwin did not know that morning, what Torian Halver would never say out loud, not to her, not to his steward, not to the horse he was leading up the rise, was that every doubt he had thrown at her at the woodpile was really an old wound he carried about someone else. Her name had been Wren, He said it now. Under the willow. Because there was no one but the water to hear. Ren. She had been an Omega from the capital too. Not a Shenreach. A smaller city. A river city with paved streets and a piano in the parlor of her father's house. And Torian had met her on a horse-buying trip in his 26th year. And he had courted her the whole way home in his letters. And he had brought her north to Ironvale as his bride in his 27th year. And she had withered here. That was the only word he had ever found for it. Withered. The wind that never stopped. The winters that shut a house indoors for weeks. The isolation of a frontier keep, where the nearest town was 2 days' ride, and the nearest kin was a memory. Ren had not been made for it. She had tried. Gods, she had tried. She had learned the seasons, and the servants, and the names of the tenants. She had smiled at feasts, and stood at his side at councils. And under the smile she had grown thinner every month. And under the thinner she had grown quieter. And under the quieter, in the 4th winter, she had grown a fever. And the fever had finished what the frontier had begun. That was what he had told himself. That the frontier had begun it. That the land had drawn the life out of her, month by month. And the fever had only ridden in at the end to claim what was already half owed. He had loved her. He had watched her fade. He had buried her under a cairn with no name, because carving the name felt like agreeing that she was gone. And he had carried, every single day since, a quiet conviction. That an Omega raised soft in a city could not survive Ironvale. That a man, who brought one here was doing her a slow cruelty, however much he loved her. That was the conviction he had ridden to Ashwin Hold with that morning. That was the conviction Sable Ashwin had split, along with the pine, without looking up. He set his hand on the top stone of the cairn. Warm. The sun had been on it since dawn. I was going to send her home, Ren. I thought it was the kind thing. I thought. He stopped, because he could not finish the sentence. Because the honest ending of the sentence was I thought she was you. And she was not. She was not you at all. She was made of something else. Something the frontier did not seem to know how to break yet. And there was a second thing under that. A thing he liked even less. Which was that he had felt something in his chest at the wood pile that he had not felt in 5 years. A small quick heat. Not lust. Simpler than lust. Interest. The interest of a man who has met, for the first time in a long time, a person he wants to know the next thing about. He had ridden out to send her home. He had ridden home himself undone. Forgive me, Ren. The water ran. It did not answer. It had never answered. But he stood a long time under the willow anyway, because standing there was the closest he came to prayer. Then he mounted, and he rode. While he rode, in another life running along behind his, Sable Ashwin walked, from the wood pile back, into the hall of Ashwin Hold. She sat down at the long table, where her uncle had once sat. She poured cold tea from a stoneware pot. She drank it in one swallow, and she began to shake. Not much, a little, in the hands, because Draven Morik had come to her land, with 6 armed men, and a smile and a clock, and she had not shown it in front of him. But now she could show it a moment, because now there was no one to see. She thought of a Shenreach, not with longing, with the exact opposite of longing. She thought of the house on Salter Street, where she had lived the last 4 years. A tall stone house belonging to a great-aunt on her mother's side. The great-aunt had taken her in, when the Ashwin money ran out. Taken her in with the sort of kindness that was really a ledger. Room and board, in exchange for management of the household staff, and a face at dinner, and a certain quiet acceptance of the fact that Sable was, from that morning on, a burden. Nobody had ever used the word to her. Nobody in a Shenreach used a word like that at table. But the word had lived in every corner of that house anyway. In the way the cook would set the smaller portion at her seat. In the way the great-aunt's friends would say, oh yes, the Ashwin girl, still with us is she. In the way her old betrothed's mother had walked past her in the market once, and pretended not to see. She had been engaged. Once. A suitable alpha of a suitable family. The engagement had ended, when the Ashwin coffers were quietly discovered to be empty. His family had returned the ring. Her family had accepted the return. Nobody had asked her what she thought. She had watched herself become, In the eyes of everyone in that city, a problem to be solved. An unmarried Omega with no money and no prospects, taking up a room in a relative's house. A burden politely borne. She had hated that more than she had ever hated anything. Not the poverty. She could take poverty. The being born. The being tolerated. The being a thing other people were kind enough not to name. Then Uncle Bram had died. Out on a frontier she had never seen. And left her 400 acres. Because Uncle Bram had always liked the niece, who could split wood. And Uncle Bram had no children of his own. The great-aunt had assumed she would sell. Would sit down that same week with the family solicitor and let a distant broker handle the disposal. Would use the coin to become, in the great-aunt's phrasing, a slightly less troublesome guest. Sable had packed 2 trunks and bought a coach seat north, and she had done it without asking permission of anyone, because she had decided, in the small hours of one specific Ashenreach night, that she would rather fail at something of her own than succeed at being tolerated in someone else's house. That was why she had come. Not for a husband, not for rescue, to stop being a burden, to have, for the first time in her 29 years, a thing that was hers. She set down the empty cup. The shaking had stopped. 12 months. Draven Morik had put 12 months on the table. She could feel the shape of it in the room like a second person breathing. And his Grace of Ironvale had stood at the wood pile, with a mouth full of a claim he had not made. She had seen him weigh it. She had seen him set it down. She did not know yet whether to be grateful for that or angry about it. Felt, in her chest, a little like both. She stood. She walked back out to the wood pile, because the pile did not care about her feelings, which was, at that moment, exactly why she wanted it. She split until her arms shook. Then she split 6 more, because Uncle Bram had also written in one of his letters that on a hard day you split past the point of easy, and you do not stop until the pile itself has told you the day is done. Torian came into his own keep at the top of the hour. He handed off the horse. He walked through the yard without speaking to the guards. He went up to his tower. He stood at the window that looked west where you could not, from this side of the range, see Ashwin Hold. But he stood there anyway. His steward found him, because his steward always found him. Your Grace. Yes. Was it done? Was what done? The lady. Did she agree to sell? He thought about the answer. He thought about it a long time. Long enough that his steward, who had served him 14 years, went still. No. 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 She did not agree, and I did not ask her again. Your Grace, if I may. You may. Draven Morik was seen riding south, from the hold at the 3rd bell. I know. I was there. He spoke to her. He spoke to her. And she recited the old law back to him, chapter and article, and told him no. His steward considered that. His steward was a careful old alpha, with a scar down one temple, who did not waste words. He did not waste them now. He only nodded once, as if he were adjusting a ledger in his head, as if a figure he had written down that morning had turned out to need changing. Your Grace. Yes. Do you intend to claim the hold under the old law before council? That was the question. Torian watched the west out of his own window, and he saw not the range, but a woman he had ridden out that morning to send home. A woman who had turned out to be a person he had entirely failed to imagine before he saw her. I do not know, he said. He did not know. That was the truth. And the truth sat in him like a stone dropped into still water. A stone that had made only a small splash. But the rings of it, he could feel already, would go on widening for a long time. I do not know, he said again. To himself this time. To the window. Down at Ashwin Hold. In the last light of the day, Sable Ashwin finally set the axe against the chopping block. Because the pile had told her the day was done. She stood a moment. Her hands throbbed. Her shoulders ached. The velvet cloak was worse than ruined now. She was going to have to cut it up for rags. She would. She looked south, toward the pass, toward the road Draven Morik had ridden away on. 12 months. That was the width of her freedom now. 12 months to plant her feet on land. That was legally hers, before the old law shook her off it. She did not smile. But she did not tremble either. She simply set the number in her mind, where it could sit next to all the other numbers she had ever had to count against. Rooms and portions and years of being born. 12 months. She could count that. She had counted worse. She turned. She went in. She lit a lamp. She sat down at her uncle's writing desk, which was now hers, and she pulled out a fresh sheet of vellum. And she began, in a small precise hand, to list. Fences to mend. Herds to move. Wells to sound. Neighbors to write to. Coin to count. Time to allocate. The list of a woman who had decided to stop being a burden the only way any of us ever stops, which is by picking up whatever tool is nearest, and swinging. Somewhere in the middle of the list, without noticing that she had done it, she wrote a fifth item under neighbors. King Halvor of Ironvale. And then, next to it, she wrote 3 words she did not entirely understand. Not an enemy. She looked at the words a long moment. Then she left them there. And she blew out the lamp. And she went to bed. Spring came to the western reach the way spring always came. Late, reluctant, in a single week of thaw that turned the whole frontier to mud, and then a second week of frost that turned the mud to ruts, and then a third week where the ruts finally softened into road again and a man could ride out without cursing the ground under his horse. Torian Halvor rode out. He rode out because Lord Bram Ashwin had asked him to. That was what he told his steward. That was what he told his captain of the guard. That was what he told the mirror in the shaving basin, when the mirror looked at him a beat too long one morning, and asked, without asking, exactly what a promise to a dead friend required in the way of weekly attention. Weekly, because it had become weekly, somewhere between the first thaw and the middle of that month, without a decision being made about it. Torian had started riding to Ashwin Hold every 7th day. Sometimes every 5th. Once, in the last week of April, every 3rd. The excuses got thinner, and then transparent, until the day he arrived with no excuse at all and simply said the lane needed walking and he happened to be on it. And Sable Ashwin, who had been carrying a bucket of well water across the yard, set the bucket down and looked at him with the small level look she had, the one that priced things without insulting them, and said, "Of course it did, Your Grace," and did not say anything else about it, because she was not going to be the one to name what he had already stopped bothering to hide. He rode out that first true spring day with a proper reason. The north fence. He had heard from a herdsman that a long stretch of the Ashwin North line had come down over the winter. Winter fence damage on the frontier was a 2-man job, sometimes 3. It was, above all, not a job for one Omega alone with a mallet and a barrow of posts. He rode out expecting to find her at the kitchen table with a list of the damage. Expecting to offer, with the grace a king could offer, the loan of 2 of his own men for a week. He found her halfway down the line already. She was in Bram's old canvas coat. The velvet was gone. He did not ask where. He suspected rags. Her hair was under a kerchief. Her hands were wrapped. Blistered under the wrap, he could tell from the shape of the wrap, which was the wrap of a hand that had done this before. And behind her, the post she had already set stood in a line that ran straight and true along the ridge. He dismounted at the last new post. He walked its length. He put a shoulder to it. He tried to rock it. It did not rock. "Tamp in layers," Sable said, not looking up, setting the next hole. "Not all at once, or the frost heaves it in the spring. Uncle Bram wrote me a whole page on the tamping. He said most alphas do it wrong out here because they think brute weight is a substitute for patience, which it is not. No. Was there something you wanted, Your Grace?" "I came to offer you 2 of my men for a week. That was kind. Thank you. You do not need them. I do not." He stood there, his shadow across her hole, his breath fogging faintly in the last of the morning cold. And he thought very quietly, well, he got down on one knee. He picked up a handful of dirt and began, without asking, to tamp. Because it was one thing to be told your offer was unnecessary. It was another to ride home from a fence line with a woman working on it having done nothing. They set 15 more posts before noon. They did not speak much. When she needed the mallet, she said mallet. When he needed a post lifted, he said lift. When they were done with the 15th, she stood up and cracked her back and looked down the length of the new line and, for the first time all morning, smiled. Just a little. Not at him. At the fence. That was the first time he saw the smile that was not for him. And he understood, in a way he would not put into words for another 2 months, that the smile that was not for him was the one he wanted most. Because it meant she liked the work. Which meant she was not performing the frontier for anyone. Which meant she was living it. He rode home that night and could not eat his supper. The garden was next. She put in a garden along the south wall of the hold that spring, and Torian came by 3 weeks later and stopped his horse at the gate, because he did not, at first, believe what he was looking at. Because the beds were laid out in a pattern he had never seen used on the frontier before. Terraced, companion planted, a screen of tall poles on the north side to break the wind and hold beans. A low, dense line of pungent herbs on the south to keep the rabbits confused. A Shenreach townhouses had courtyards, she said, coming out with a spade, over her shoulder when she saw where his eyes were. You could not have a farm. You could have 12 square yards. If you wanted food, from 12 square yards you learned every trick anyone had ever written down. My mother taught me. Hers taught her. 3 generations of Ashwin Omegas keeping food on the table, when the coin ran thin. And it ran thin often, Your Grace. It ran thin for a very long time. She did not say it with self-pity. She said it the way she said everything, as a fact of the ledger. Because the ledger, he was beginning to understand, was the thing Sable Ashwin trusted most. And the ledger of her whole life had been a slow arithmetic of doing more with less. He asked, that day, if he could take a cutting of the pungent line for his own kitchens. Because his own kitchens had a rabbit problem, and he had, until that morning, believed rabbits were simply a fact. She gave him 3, wrapped in a damp cloth, without smiling. But she looked at him when she gave them to him. And her look was not the flat look of the woodpile. It was a look that had, somewhere in the back of it, the small beginning of something else. He rode home with 3 cuttings in his saddlebag, and a heart that had begun to do a thing he did not know how to name. Then the moon elk. In the last week of May, a message came from Ashwin Hold to his keep. Torian read it twice because he could not, on the first read, believe it. The lady had bought a small moon elk herd off a drover from the pass. 20 head. She wanted him to know, because the herd would be feeding on the shared upland grazing between their 2 properties, and she did not want any confusion about brands. He rode out. He watched her, from the ridge above the upland, work those 20 head down into a smaller pasture using nothing but a long stick, 2 dogs, and a voice that was quieter than the voice most drovers used, and worked twice as well. He watched her get thrown by one of the 2-year-olds and get up and get back on. He watched her, at the end of that afternoon, milk one of the older females, with hands so steady the female did not once try to move. Where did you learn? He said, when she came out of the pasture with the pail. Uncle Bram wrote me the pattern. I practiced on a neighbor's dairy cow last summer. In a Shenreach. She was very patient with me. Her name was Peach. 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 You learned to milk a moon elk on a cow named Peach. Peach did the best she could, Your Grace. She was a cow of great inner nobility. That was the first time he laughed in front of Sable Ashwin. Came out of him before he could catch it. A short bark of a laugh. Startled at itself. And Sable smiled at the laugh. And this time the smile was for him. Just a flash of it. And he felt it land in his chest like a coin dropped into deep water. He rode home again. And again he could not eat his supper. Because a man who has been alone a long time does not always recognize the shape of the thing that has come to sit at his table until it has stayed a while. The shadow wolves came in June. Sable dealt with them in a way that startled the whole valley. She borrowed a longbow. She sat up 3 nights on the roof of the barn, with a lantern of juniper oil burning at her ankles. On the 3rd night she put 1 arrow into the lead wolf's shoulder, and 1 into the flank of the second, and the pack, which was smaller than it had looked in shadow, broke and did not come back that summer. Torian heard about it from a farrier. He rode out the next morning without an excuse at all. He came into the yard, and she was cleaning the arrows on the porch, singing something under her breath that he did not recognize because it was not an Iron Veil song. And he stood there in the yard with his horse's reins in his hand, and he opened his mouth and closed it, and opened it again and finally said uselessly, Juniper. Yes. That was in one of his letters too. That was in one of his letters too. Your Grace, are you going to keep standing in my yard? Or are you going to come in and have tea? Because I have been on that roof 3 nights, and I do not have the patience for the middle option. He came in. He had tea. That was the summer the visits stopped being about promises. That was the summer they stopped being about anything he could put a name to. They were simply the shape his week had taken. Ride out on the 5th day. Fix something small. Sit at her table. Ride back at the last light. Repeat. His steward noticed. His steward said nothing about it. His steward was too old, and too careful a man to say a thing out loud that could not be unsaid. But one afternoon in July, Torian was in the archive of his own keep looking for a survey map of the upland grazing, and he opened the wrong chest and he found the wrong bundle, and the wrong bundle turned out to be a stack of letters tied, with a green ribbon in the hand of Lord Bram Ashwin. Bram had written to Torian too. Not as often as Bram had written to his niece, but often. 20 years of frontier friendship in one green-tied bundle. Torian sat down on the floor of his own archive, with the bundle across his knees, and untied the ribbon. Because it had been 5 years since he had opened those letters. Because after Ren he had put them away, and he had not been able to bear them. He read them straight through. Because grief, when it is honest, does not skip pages. He found the one he was afraid he would find near the bottom. Bram had written it in the winter after Ren. The winter Torian had walked around his own keep like a shadow, and refused to attend council, and refused most food, and refused, most of all, any letter longer than a sentence. Bram had written 6 sentences. In the middle of them was one Torian read 3 times, because the letters seemed to move on the page. There is a niece I would like you to know one day, when you are ready to be known. She is 9 years old, and she can split a round of pine cleaner than any of my hands. She has your kind of stubborn. She has your kind of grief coming too, I think, though not the same grief. Wait for her, Torian. Not to save her. To let her show you a thing you have not seen yet. Torian sat on the floor of the archive with the letter in his hands, and did not move for a long time. He had forgotten it. He had forgotten Bram had ever written those words. He had read them once in the black of that winter and put them away with the rest of the bundle and never come back to them. And now they were in his lap, and they had been meant for a specific 9-year-old Omega splitting rounds in an Ashenreach courtyard. And that Omega was now 29, and she was sitting 3 hours ride west of him at his dead friend's writing desk. And she had bought moon elk and set fences and shot shadow wolves, and taught him, without meaning to, how to laugh out loud in a yard again. He read the sentence about grief a 4th time. Grief coming too, I think, though not the same grief. And he understood, sitting there on his own archive floor, that Bram had known things about his niece that Torian had not asked. Because Torian had assumed. Because a soft velvet cloak had told him a story he had not bothered to verify. He put the letters back in the chest. He did not put the ribbon back. He put the ribbon in his pocket. Because he did not know why. Because he wanted a small green thing to carry with him for a day. He rode out to Ashwin Hold at the end of that week. He stayed for supper because Sable set 2 plates without asking, the way she had begun to set them a month before, the way a habit forms, before the habit's owner notices it. They had lamb stew. She had made it herself. She had made it well. Halfway through, she set down her spoon, and she looked at him across the table, and she said the thing he had been half afraid, half hoping she would say for weeks. Your Grace, why were you so sure I would fail? You did not know me. You saw my cloak, and you decided the land would break me. Why? He looked at his plate. Because looking at her was harder than looking at the plate. Because the honest answer would have taken a long time. And he had never told any part of it out loud to any living creature. I knew an Omega once, he said, slowly, who came out to this country from a city, and the land was hard on her. He got no further than that. His nerve went. It went the way it always went. Because to say the next sentence was to say the name. And he had not, in 5 years, said the name out loud to anyone, but the water under a willow. I did not want to watch that happen again. Sable heard it. He could see her hearing it. She heard the shape of the not said thing under it. She did not reach for the not said thing, which was, in its way, the greatest kindness anyone had done him in 5 years. Well, Your Grace, I am not her, whoever she was. I hope you are starting to see that. I am starting to, yes. She smiled. Small. She picked up her spoon. She went back to the stew. Because Sable Ashwin understood, in some way Torian could not have articulated, but recognized, that a heart mid-thaw is not helped by any pressure to hurry. He walked out to his horse at the last of the light, and he stood at the gate, and he looked back at the lit windows of the hold, and he understood that he had, somewhere in the last 4 months, without permission from himself, begun to love her. It was a bad month to figure it out, because at the beginning of the next week, King Draven Morik of Morika's Reach filed his petition. The petition was 32 pages long. It arrived at both Ironvale and Ashen Reach on the same morning by 2 separate couriers, because Draven did not waste an opportunity to be theatrical. The substance of it was this. Lord Bram Ashwin's will had, per the argument of Morika's Reach's lawyers, been improperly executed under the old law, because the beneficiary was an Omega, without an Alpha protector of record at the moment of probate. The petition asked the Grand Council, at its coming autumn convening, to void the will, restore Ashwin hold to unclaimed frontier status, and, per geographical proximity, transfer its stewardship to the crown of Morika's Reach. Torian read the petition 3 times, in his tower, with the ribbon from his archive on the table in front of him. He understood on the first read that Draven had built a genuinely strong argument. Draven's lawyers were not fools. The old law was old for a reason. There was, in the yellow parchment of the founding decrees, a whole rotten cellar of clauses about Omega inheritance that had been left untouched for 200 years, because most alphas of standing preferred not to look at that cellar. Draven had gone down into it. He had come up with a knife. Torian understood, on the second read, exactly how he could stop it. In 1 line of counterpetition, I, Torian Halver of Ironvale, claim protector's rights over the Omega Sable Ashwin, and all lands, chattels, and stock lawfully in her possession, as of this date, per Chapter 4 Article 14 of the old law. 14. Not 11. 14 was the counterweight clause. 14 said that an alpha of standing could preempt a frontier reassignment by declaring protectorate. 14 also said, in the plainest possible language, that upon declaration all the Omega's property and legal voice passed under the declaring alpha's signet. Everything she had come out here to build, under his signet. He understood on the third read that he could not do it. He sat at his desk with the parchment in front of him for a long time. He thought of the woodpile. He thought of the moon elk milked on Faith and a cow named Peach. He thought of the small smile at the mended fence that had not been for him. He thought of the letter in the green ribbon. He picked up his pen. He wrote no counterpetition. He wrote instead 1 line to his steward. Ride to Ashwin Hold at first light. Bring her the petition. Tell her I will meet her at the Grand Council. Tell her nothing else. He sent it before he could change his mind. His steward, when he came in to receive the order, read it. Read it again. Looked up at Torian with a face carefully blank. Your Grace. Yes. Chapter 4 Article 14 would end this in an afternoon. It would. You are not going to invoke it. I am not. May I ask why? Torian thought about the answer for a long time. Longer than he had ever thought about an answer to that steward. And when he spoke slowly, because he did not want to get the sentence wrong. Because if I claim her under 14 to save her, I give Draven the argument for the rest of his life. That an Omega in this country cannot hold her own land. That her uncle's will was a paper convenience. That the frontier is alpha ground, and always was. I would beat Draven this year, and I would lose the shape of the country for the next 50. And she would live inside the loss. His steward did not answer that immediately. His steward folded the order. His steward held it a beat, considering. Then he nodded once. Your Grace. Yes. She had better be as formidable at council as you believe. She is more formidable at council than I believe. I have been underbelieving her for 8 months. I am done underbelieving her. Right. The steward rode. Sable Ashwin received the petition at breakfast. She read it in her uncle's chair. She did not shake this time. She simply set it on the table. She poured tea. She read it again, slowly, marking clauses with her thumbnail. She looked up at the steward. His Grace does not intend to file a counter under 14. He does not, my lady. Good. She said only that. Good. She said it flat, the way she said everything. But the steward, who had served Alpha Kings a long time, saw something behind the flat that most people would not have seen. Which was relief. Not the relief of a woman who had been rescued. The relief of a woman who had, against odds, been trusted. She rode to the Grand Council in the last week of harvest, with her uncle's will in a leather case, 6 pages of case law she had copied out of Bram's private library in her own hand, and a plain gray traveling dress cut severely at the throat. She rode escorted by 4 of her own hands. She did not ride escorted by any of Torian's. Because she and Torian had agreed, by a look across a supper table 2 weeks before, that she would ride to council under her own colors, or she would not ride at all. The Grand Council met in the round hall at the old capital of the Confederation, which was, that year, in the city of Velmore. Torian was already seated when Sable entered. He did not stand, because standing would have been the courtesy shown to a lady under a man's protection, and she was not under his protection. Which was the whole point. Draven Morik was seated across the ring from Torian. Draven wore red. Draven had brought his own 2 lawyers and a scribe. Draven smiled at Sable when she entered. He smiled the way he had smiled at her woodpile. It was a bad smile. It had gotten worse. The clerk read the petition. The clerk read the response. There was no response of Torian's on file. The clerk noted this. The whole ring noted it. There was a small hum around the ring, of alphas who had come expecting a claim under 14, and had discovered no claim. Sable rose. She spoke. She spoke for 41 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. She quoted Chapter 4, Article 11. She quoted Chapter 4, Article 14 and set out coolly why she was not asking anyone to invoke it. She quoted the founding decree that had first permitted Omega inheritance on the frontier and traced its unbroken use through 6 cases in 200 years. She read out 3 sentences of her uncle's will. She read out 3 lines of a letter he had written to the Ashenreach Court of Chancery 10 years before his death, in which he had explicitly named her, at 19, as his intended heir. She named the year. She named the notary. She held up a wax seal. She sat down. Draven's lawyers rose. They spoke for 11 minutes. They spoke well. They did not speak better than she had. The ring voted. 9 crowns of the Confederation. 6 for Sable's inheritance. 2 for Draven. 1 abstention. The clerk banged the seal. The Grand Council adjourned for luncheon. Torian did not go to her at the recess. She did not go to him. They understood, each of them, that going to the other in that hall would undo the thing that had just happened. Which was a woman winning her own case on her own record, without an alpha's paw on the outcome. He passed her once in the corridor. He inclined his head. She inclined hers. That was the whole of it in public. In private, on the ride home 2 days later, they met at a coach change in a village 2 hours south of Ashwin Hold. Their coaches happened to have been booked for the same waypoint, which was not an accident, though neither of them had said out loud that it wasn't. He came out onto the porch of the coaching inn. She was already there, drinking tea from a stoneware cup, with steam on her breath in the late autumn air. She did not turn as he stepped out. She was looking east, toward the range, toward home. Your Grace, my lady, thank you for not filing under 14. You do not have to thank me for that. I do, because most alphas in the Confederation on today's showing would have filed. Most alphas in the Confederation are afraid. Of what? Of an Omega with a wax seal. That got him the smile. Small. For him. It was becoming, he thought, his favorite of the smiles. He will not stop, you know. I know. He lost the paper argument today. He will try the other kind. I know. Your Grace. Yes. Will you come to supper tomorrow? I will. She turned. She went in. The coach change was called. She rode home. He rode home an hour behind her on his own road, and he could not, that night, remember the last time he had felt this level of good, and this level of afraid inside one chest at the same time. Draven Morik moved on a moonless night. 9 days after the council. Sable came out to the yard, before dawn because one of her dogs was barking wrong. Wrong in the way a dog barks, when the wrongness is at the perimeter, and not the door. She had a lantern in one hand, and the longbow in the other, unstrung. She got to the pasture gate, and it was open, which was impossible, because she had latched it herself the night before with the double bar Uncle Bram had taught her. The double bar was on the ground, cut through, with a blade sharper than any blade any drifter carried. The moon elk were out, all 20, scattered across 2 square miles of unfamiliar ground in the last of the dark. She ran back to the yard for the second lantern and the second dog, and it was on the second lantern's swing that she saw the well cover was off and set gently to the side. Not thrown, set, which meant someone had wanted her to notice, which meant a message. She lowered the lantern. She smelled bittercress. She smelled bittercress in her own well, which was a plant that grew nowhere within a day's ride of Ashwin Hold, and which any alpha who had ever hired a poisoner knew was the single easiest agent to slip into a rural water source without leaving a trace beyond the smell, and which was, if consumed, a slow sickness rather than a fast one. Draven had not tried to kill her that night. He had tried to hurt her. She stood up from the well. She looked south. The dark road was empty, but somewhere down that road at his ease, King Morik was in a saddle riding home. She saddled her fastest horse. She lit a signal on the highest post of her north pasture. She sent her farrier's boy east to Torian's keep, with a note that was 4 words long. Come now, bring pails. Torian read the note by candlelight in his study. He was riding within 10 minutes. He came into her yard at first light, with 15 of his men, 12 empty pails, 6 sacks of activated charcoal, and every clean cask his kitchens had held. They spent the whole day on the well, draining, testing, refilling, testing. Sable spent the whole day out in the upland with her 2 dogs and her 3 best hands, gathering moon elk 1 and 2 and 3 at a time out of gullies and thickets, half of them still fine, one with a torn shoulder from a fall in the dark. By dusk the well was clean, and the herd was back, and the double bar had been replaced with a triple bar that Torian had ordered forged on the spot at his own smithy. They were both filthy, both shaking with tiredness. Neither of them had eaten since the day before. Sable made stew, because Sable made stew when Sable did not know what else to do. They sat by her fire, and they did not talk for a long time. The stew was hot. The bread was yesterday's. Outside, the frontier had gone black. He wanted us to find the smell, she said finally, to the fire, not to him. He did not care whether I drank the water. He wanted the message. The message was that he can reach through my gate whenever he chooses. Yes, I do not know what to do about that. You do not have to know tonight. I do have to know. I have to know soon. Because if I do not know soon, one of my hands drinks bittercress water on a warm afternoon, and does not know why he cannot stand up the next morning. He set down his spoon. He looked at her across the small table. She was tired in a way he had not yet seen her tired. And under the tired was something he had also not seen, which was fear. Not fear of the frontier. Fear of a specific man, with rings on every finger, who had decided to make her his lesson. He reached, without thinking, across the table. He put his hand over hers. She did not pull away. She did not pull toward him either. She just let her hand be there under his. Warm, small under his palm and stronger than his palm at once. And she looked at him with the gray storm eyes, and he saw her think about turning her hand over. And he saw her decide not to. Not tonight. Not yet, Your Grace, she said. Very quiet. I want to. I am not going to pretend I do not. But not on a night when I am afraid. Because I do not want to remember doing it on a night when I was afraid. He nodded. He took his hand back. He did not, in that moment, trust his voice for a full sentence. Later. Yes. He rode home in the dark. He did not go to bed. He sat in his tower with the ribbon from the archive across his knuckles. And he understood, watching the last stars go out over his own range, that he had crossed some final line in his own chest that night. That the small heat at the woodpile had grown into a hearth. And the hearth would not be put out again in this life. Whatever came, 2 weeks later, the sky above the North Range began to gray in the way that only meant one thing on this frontier. Torian saw it from his tower first, at the third bell of an afternoon in the last week, before winter proper. He knew the color. He had seen it once before, 5 years back. He knew what was coming down out of the north with it. Wraithstorm, the kind of blizzard that dropped in an hour and stayed for 2 days and killed anything caught between shelters. The kind of blizzard that had killed Ren. Not directly, not the fever. The fourth winter of storms like this one had been the winter she had stopped smiling. And the fever had come after, into a body already thinned by too many days of a house shut against a wind that never stopped. He watched the gray build. He counted the hours to landfall. 6 hours. Maybe 7. Ashwin-Hold sat 3 hours west by hard riding. The upland pasture, where Sable's moon elk grazed at this hour of the year, sat further west than that. Between the pasture and the hold, if the herd was caught out, was a bad open flat, where snow would pile and wind would strip. A bad place to die. A worse place to try to save an animal from dying. He stood at his tower window, and he understood, without any deliberation at all, that the storm coming down over his range was coming for the second Omega he had loved. And he was not going to watch it take her. Sable saw the sky at the same hour Torian saw it. She was in the upland, with 2 of her hands, checking the ford, where the herd came down to water. She looked north. Because the light on the pasture had changed. Because the light had gone flat, the way a candle flattens under a hand. She knew the color. Uncle Bram had drawn it for her once. In a letter, 15 years ago, when she had been 14. A crude gray wash of an inked wing on a piece of paper. And a note under the wing that read, "If you ever see this above the North Range, you have 4 hours to be indoors." Not 5. Not 4.5. 4. She had 4. The upland to the hold was 2. From the hold, the moon elk pasture to the shelter draw was another one hard driven. Which left her 1 hour to spare. Which was not enough. Because the herd was in the wrong pasture. Because the herd was, that afternoon, in the flat south of the ridge. Not in the draw. Because she had moved them a week ago to graze off the last of the fall bunch grass. She had put her own herd in the killing pasture. Because she had wanted them fat before winter. Because she had been thinking about fat, and not about a storm 3 days early. The mistake sat on her chest like a coin of cold iron. She did not have time to hold the mistake. She did not have time to hate herself for making it. Later, if there was a later, she turned her horse. She shouted at her 2 hands to ride for the hold, and shudder it. She rode alone for the flat. She had 1 hour to do a job that needed 3 men. She had, in place of 2 of the 3, a will laid over a woman who had said out loud one time in her uncle's kitchen that she would rather fail at something of her own than survive being tolerated in someone else's house. She had said it aloud, to her uncle's chair, as a promise. She was going to keep it. She reached the flat at the 3rd quarter of the hour. The sky had gone from gray to iron. The wind had picked up in a way she felt in the sockets of her jaw. The moon elk knew. The moon elk were already restless. Bunched. 2 of the older cows had begun to drift on the wind, which was the beginning of the drift that would kill them all, if she did not turn it. She whistled her dogs to the flanks. She unshipped her stock stick. She began, slowly, methodically, to shape the herd into a moving line. She did not shout. She had learned, from Peach and from 20 head of borrowed patience, that a herd in a wind did not respond to shouting. A herd in a wind responded to a lower voice, to smaller gestures, to a body that moved like weather itself. Slower than the fear, slower than the wind. She got them turning. She got them walking. She got them into the mouth of the draw. And then the storm dropped. It dropped the way Bram had said it would. In an hour flat. From the last honest light of the afternoon to a howling black-white, where a woman could not see her own hand at arm's length. The wind did not blow. It hammered. Came out of the north in slabs. Carried snow that was more ice than snow. Ice that cut where it touched. She lost the dogs first. Not lost. She could not see them. She heard one bark at her right. Then nothing. She trusted them to work anyway. She trusted them because she had raised them. She lost one of the 2-year-olds 10 minutes, into the wall of it. It broke from the line, and it was gone. She could not go after it, because going after it meant losing the other 19. She swallowed the loss. She swallowed it hard. She kept the line moving. She did not know how long she had been in it when she heard the second horse. The second horse was not one of hers. She heard it come up along the draw wall to her left. She could not see it. She heard the hoof on stone. She heard the low voice call her name through the howl. Sable. Not my lady. Not Lady Ashwin. Sable. She turned in her saddle. She could not see him. She saw a darker dark inside the storm, and a hand. And then she saw his face at maybe 6 feet from hers, whitened with ice on the brow of his hood. Torian, on your right flank. 2 head are drifting. I have them. Do not lose me. I will not lose you. He was gone into the white. She heard him work. She heard him bring the 2 drifting head back into the line. She heard him call from further off in the storm. How many did you have? 20. I lost 1 at the top. 19. 19. We take 19 home. They took 19 home. It was 90 minutes of a labor she would not, in the years afterward, be fully able to describe. Because parts of it lived in a chamber of her memory that did not open to language. She remembered the wind. She remembered the ice on her lashes freezing them shut every 3rd or 4th minute, and having to wipe them with a wet glove that was already stiff. She remembered Torian's voice, from her right, and then her left, and then her right again, always at a distance of 1 animal, always where the line was about to break. She remembered a moment when her own horse stumbled and went down on 1 knee and got up again. She remembered a moment when she thought quite calmly, so this is how it happens, and then went on working. Because Uncle Bram had also written in a letter that the moment you noticed you might die was not the moment you were allowed to stop working. That was the moment you worked harder. Because you had almost surrendered, and that was not permitted. They brought the herd into the shelter of the draw at what she guessed was the 2nd hour of full storm. The draw walls broke the wind. The animals bunched into a knot of steaming bodies. Torian's horse and hers stood at the mouth. The dogs came in 1 by 1 out of the white. All 3 of them accounted for. She counted moon elk. 19. She counted twice. 19. She could not feel her feet. She could not feel her hands past the 2nd knuckle. Her cheeks were meat. Torian came to her stirrup. He put a hand on her thigh, through the stiff wool of her riding trouser. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. They needed shelter. He was in the way of storms, saying so without words. They walked the horses. They led. The draw took them east. It gave them a wall the whole way. 90 more agonized minutes, and they broke out of the draw, into the yard of Ashwin Hold, half blind, with their hoods packed white, with their eyelashes crusted, with the ice like scale on the wool of their cloaks. 2 of her hands were on the porch. Her hands had shuttered the hold. Her hands had lit every lamp in the front room. Her hands wanted to run to her. She waved them off. She could not stand another person's hands on her right at that moment, because if a person touched her right at that moment she would break in a way she was not prepared to break in front of her own men. She and Torian got the horses into the barn. They rubbed them down themselves. They forked in extra hay. They came back across the yard leaning into each other because the wind was still hammering, and neither of them, by then, was fully steady on their own. Inside. Door barred. Fire built high. Torian got the fire. Sable got coffee onto the hook. Her fingers would not obey her for the first 3 minutes. She swore at them under her breath. And then, because swearing at them did not help, she laughed at them, small and cracked. And Torian, kneeling at the hearth, with an armload of kindling, heard the laugh and looked over his shoulder at her. And there was something in his face she had not, in 11 months of knowing him, seen before. Naked. That was the word. The face he had ridden into her yard with the 1st October was gone. What was left, kneeling on her stones with soot on his gloves, was a man who had spent 2 hours in a storm afraid he was going to bury a 2nd Omega, and had come out the other side, and had not yet put back on any of the plating that made him a king. He watched her at the hook. He said the thing plainly, because plain speech had always been between them the only kind that worked. I have to tell you about her. I know. I have to tell you now. Sit down. Coffee first. Then tell me. They sat. He drank. He set the cup down. He told her. He told her about the horse-buying trip he had taken as a young alpha of 26. He told her about the river city, where he had met a girl at the market in a yellow dress. About the letters he had written her the whole way home. About bringing her north to Ironvale in his 27th year, as his bride. His Omega, his chosen bond. Her name. He said her name out loud. Ren. He told Sable about the withering. He said the word the way it sat in him. Withered. He described it the way it had actually looked. The way a bright thing had gone thinner every month. The way the isolation had done a kind of work on her that Ironvale did not have a name for. The way she had tried. Gods. The way she had tried. Every feast. Every council. Every visit to a tenant's kitchen. And under the trying, month by month, the thinning. And under the thinning, in the fourth winter, the fever. And under the fever, the funeral. And under the funeral, a cairn under a willow on the ridge above his own river. A cairn with no name carved on it. Because carving the name had felt like agreeing. He told her he had, every single day for 5 years, carried a conviction. That an Omega raised in a city could not survive Ironvale. That a man, who brought one here was doing her a slow cruelty, however much he loved her. That the frontier had killed his wife by inches, while the fever had only signed the paper. He told her that this was the conviction he had ridden to Ashwin Hold with on a cold morning last October. He told her he had looked at her ruined velvet cloak and seen Ren. He told her he had ridden out to send her home to save her, because he could not, he had believed, bear to watch it happen again. And then he told her the last thing, which was that she had proved him wrong at the woodpile in the space of 3 rounds. And in the fence line, and in the garden, and on the roof with the longbow, and in the Grand Council Hall, and in the moon elk pasture that afternoon. She had proved him wrong every single week for 11 months. And he had, somewhere along the way, without permission, stopped being wrong about her and started being in love with her. And tonight, watching her ride out into a wraith storm to save her own herd, he had understood, all the way down to the marrow of his own bones, that he had spent 5 years grieving a woman he loved. And that he could not, and would not, spend the rest of his life grieving a second one. Because Sable Ashwin was not going to be a second one. She was not made to wither. She was made to bloom in exactly this wind. He stopped. He put his head down. His hands were on his knees. His shoulders were shaking. And then, without any sound at all, an Alpha King wept in a Hold's front room. For the first time since the burial. Without warning. Without dignity. Sable did not touch him. Not yet, because she had understood, watching him talk, that he needed to finish the crossing on his own. She let him weep. She kept her hands around her coffee cup. She kept her face still. When his shoulders slowed, she spoke. Quiet, steady. The way she spoke to a nervous animal. Torian. Yes. I am so sorry about Ren. Thank you. I need to say 2 things. Because they matter. And I do not want you to hear only one of them tonight. Say them. The first is this. I am not her. She was a woman I never met. And I honor what she was to you. Her cairn is going to keep the willow. Her name is going to be spoken in this house whenever you need it spoken. I am not going to be jealous of a woman who died before I ever set foot here. I am not made in a way that is jealous of grief. Do you understand? Yes. The second is this. I did not come to this country to be saved. Not from a storm. Not from Draven Morik. Not from being a burden in another woman's house. I came to stop being a thing that other people carried. So do not, please, ever try to save me from this country again. But you can, if you like, share it with me. Those are 2 different things, Torian. I need you to know that they are 2 different things. Because the whole of the rest of our lives hangs on which one you meant when you rode into that pasture tonight. He looked up at her. His face was still wet. He did not, this time, look away. I meant share. Good. I meant it before I knew the word. Good. I have been meaning it, I think, since the moon elk on the cow named Peach. Peach was a cow of great inner nobility. He laughed, cracked out of him like a plate breaking. It was the second time she had heard him laugh. It was the first time she had heard him laugh, with tears still on his face. She thought and did not say that she wanted to be the person who heard both kinds of his laughing for the rest of her life. She was going to say the next thing. She was going to reach across and take his hand. She did not have the chance, because at that moment the shutters on the west window rattled hard. Not from the wind, from a bar being thrown from outside. And then, from 3 sides of the hold at once, the sound of boots on the porch. Boots, plural, many. She was on her feet, before her cup had stopped moving on the table. Torian was on his feet a beat behind her. His hand was on his sword. Her hand was on the knife at her hip. And a voice, from outside, muffled by the shutter, but unmistakable in its shape, spoke through the wood. Lady Ashwin, open your door. We have your 2 hands. We would like to negotiate. Draven. He had come under the cover of the storm. It was, she understood in one clean flash of thought, brilliant. Draven had done what no honest court could ever see. He had ridden his men through the wraith storm at their own peril to reach a hold that no council courier would attempt to reach for the next 2 days. If they killed her in this house tonight, if they killed Torian in this house tonight, the story would be one thing and one thing only. The storm took them. Except Draven did not know one thing, which was that Uncle Bram, in his 40th letter of her 17th year, had described to her in careful diagrams the wine cellar door under the east pantry. The one that opened, if a person knew the trick of the second lever, into a stone tunnel that ran 140 feet under the yard, under the outer wall, out to the old dry well at the edge of the orchard. The dry well no one had used in 20 years, because there was a better one nearer the house. The dry well Draven's men would not have posted around, because Draven's men would not know it was there. She did not speak. She did not need to. She caught Torian's eye. She flicked her chin at the pantry. She raised 2 fingers. He nodded once. She spoke through the shutter. Loud, steady. The voice she had used at council. King Morik. Lady. 2 of my hands. Alive. For now. Give me 5 minutes to dress and consider. You have 3. I will need 5. You have 4. Done. She moved. She and Torian did not run. Running made noise. They walked in the fast measured way of 2 people, who had, in the last 3 hours, come to know each other's stride. She led. She took 2 of the lit lamps off the table because down there they were going to need light. He took her longbow off the wall, and the quiver, and slung both across his back. Which was the moment she knew, without asking, that he had understood the whole plan, from the flick of a chin. Which was the moment she understood that she was going to marry him. If she lived through the next hour. The pantry, the east wall, the false back panel of the shelving. The lever behind the flour tin. She threw it. The stone slab in the floor gave a soft dry click. She lifted it. Cold air came up out of the tunnel. Cold, dry, dead air old. Down. He came down behind her. She reset the slab. She lit the 2 lamps at the bottom of the ladder. She did not have to give him a plan. He was already unslinging the bow. He was already moving into the tunnel behind her at a hunched pace. They went the 140 feet in what she estimated at 3 minutes. Because Torian was still stiff in the shoulders from the storm, and because she was still under everything 29 and not made of iron, and her body was starting, at last, to notice everything she had done to it that day. They came up under the orchard well. She listened. The sound of boots on the porch was faint here. There was no one at the dry well. She had been right. She came out. He came out. The storm was still hammering. But the orchard was on the leeward side of a low rise. And the low rise cut the wind by half, which was enough to see, which was enough to work. She turned to him. She was going to speak. He held up one gloved finger. He was looking past her, low along the ground. She turned to see what he was seeing. 6 men, on the far side of the yard, silhouetted against the light, from the west window of the hold. Draven was in the middle. 2 of the men had, between them, one of her hands, her farrier, bound. Standing, not thank the gods dead. The other hand she could not see, which meant either bound out of view, or worse. She thought later, when it was over, that the decision she made in the next 4 seconds was the most important decision she had ever made in 29 years. She did not decide it in her head. She decided it in the muscles of her right arm, which had drawn a bow at shadow wolves in June, and at every straw target set in her own yard every morning of the summer between June and October. Because Uncle Bram had also written that the frontier woman who did not shoot straight in the fall was buying her own funeral in the spring. She held out her hand. Torian handed her the bow, without a question, without a hesitation, because he understood. Because between him and her the question of whose hand should hold the bow tonight was not, and had never been, a question. She strung it in the shelter of the orchard wall. She nocked an arrow. She stepped out around the trunk of the last apple tree at the corner of the wall. 52 feet. She had shot longer at the barn. She did not shoot to kill. She shot to break. The arrow took Draven Morik in the shoulder of his sword arm, deep, through the pauldron at the seam. He went down on one knee, with a sound she would not describe to anyone afterward. And in the moment his men turned to look at their king going down, Torian came out from behind her with his sword. It was a short fight, which was the mercy of surprise. 2 of Draven's men ran. 3 surrendered. Torian opened the shoulder of the 6th with a single stroke, and the 6th also surrendered, because surrender was the only sensible thing left to do. Sable put her second arrow through the ropes on her farrier's wrists, because the farrier's wrists were bound behind him with a slipknot that opened when the outer rope was cut. Bram had taught her that shot with a rope on a fence post. Once, 6 years ago, in writing, her farrier came free. He was steady. He was, God's bless the frontier that made men like him, ready. He picked up a fallen sword. He stood guard over the 3 surrendering men, while Torian and Sable walked, side by side, across the yard to King Draven Morik on his knees in the snow. Draven looked up at her. His eyes were bright with hate. Kingdom girl, your grace, you shoot. Uncle Bram wrote me the whole page. You should have killed me. I know exactly what I should have done, your grace. I chose the other. She crouched. She looked at him at eye level. She did not smile, but she understood, done being afraid of him. She was done in a way that would last the rest of her life. You are going to the council, bound, in your own saddle if you can still sit one, behind your own banner, because I will not deny you your banner, and you are going to answer to the ring for what you did tonight. And the ring is going to strip you. You know that. I know that. You have been reading the same law I have been reading. There is no clause that survives an attempted murder under a wraithstorm. She stood. You lost the paper argument in Velmore, she said, quieter. You lost the other kind in my orchard. Go home the way you came, bound. She turned. She walked past him. She did not look back. Torian walked at her shoulder. He did not speak until they were at the porch. Then quietly, only for her, one line. You are the most formidable woman I have ever known. You are late to that opinion. By 11 months. Approximately. I will spend the rest of my life catching up. The storm blew for 2 more days. In those 2 days they did the things that had to be done. Torian's men, arriving at first light on horses that had wintered better than any horses had a right to, took Draven Morik and his surviving men into custody. Sable's other hand, found bound in the smokehouse, was alive and would keep his fingers. The 3 surrendering mercenaries were split among the 3 keeps of the Confederation for holding. Word went out to Velmore by the first rider the pass would take. In the front room of Ashwin Hold on the second night of the storm, with the fire high and the wind finally starting to slack against the walls, Torian Halver did what he had not done at Velmore, and had not done at the Moonelk pasture, and had not done at any of the 100 smaller moments when he had almost done it. He asked. He did not kneel. He was not that kind of alpha, and she was not. He had learned that kind of omega. He sat across the table from her. His hands were on the wood. He looked at her steadily. He asked, Sable, Torian, I do not want to save you. You have shown me plain that you do not need to be saved. I want to share this country with me. 2 holds with a border down the middle. I would like, more than I have wanted anything in 5 years, to take the border down. She waited. She waited longer than he expected. She waited because she was thinking about a woman who had stepped off a coach in a ruined velvet cloak one October morning, with a promise to a chair in her chest. She was thinking about whether saying yes to the man across the table kept the promise, or broke it. She understood after a long moment that saying yes kept it, because he had not asked her to move into his hold and stand at his window. He had asked her to run her land beside his, to keep her seal, to keep her hands, to keep the ledger, to keep, above all, the thing she had come out here to have. "I will have you," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "My hold is my hold. Your hold is your hold. And we run them side by side. 2 rulers, 2 seals, 2 ledgers that meet in the middle at a fence we can walk down together twice a year, and mend where the winter breaks it. I will not be an Omega at a window in Ironvale. I will be a landholder married to an Alpha King. Can you live with an Omega like that?" He laughed, the full laugh, the kind she had not yet heard in him. "Sable, an Omega like that is the only kind I have ever wanted. I only did not know it until you split 3 rounds of pine without looking up at me." They were married in the spring, in the yard between the 2 holds, on a piece of ground that had been, until that morning, the seam of a fence. The fence they took down together the day before. The posts they stacked for winter kindling. Draven Morik was stripped of his crown by unanimous vote of the Grand Council in the 2nd week of March. His seals were broken, over a stone in Velmore. His lands passed under Confederation stewardship for 3 years, and then were divided among his cousins under a new set of clauses. Clauses Sable Ashwin had drafted, and Torian Halver had signed, and the whole ring had voted through. Clauses that said, in the plainest possible language, that no Omega in this country would ever again lose her land for the crime of holding it alone. They lived long lives, both of them. They ran their 2 holds side by side for 40 years. Sable never once moved into Ironvale Keep as a bride at a window. She lived in Ashwin Hold. Torian rode over 4 days a week. Sable rode over 3. They kept 2 ledgers. They met in the middle at the old fence line twice a year, and walked it in April and in October, and they mended what winter had broken. The wood pile stayed. Sable split her own wood for the rest of her days. Long after there were hands to do it. Long after her joints had started to protest. Torian would sometimes come out into the yard and lean against the post of the porch and watch her. The way he had watched her that first cold morning. Except now the watching was all love and no doubt. Once, many years in, a young Alpha came looking for work at the hold. He saw the Queen of Ashwin, because that was what the frontier had, without asking her, come to call her, at the wood pile. He saw the axe in her hands. He was young, and he was polite, and he was raised soft in a town, and he made the mistake of walking up and offering to do the splitting for the little lady. Torian was passing through the yard. He was in his 60s now. His beard was gray. His shoulders were still square. He heard the offer. He stopped. He looked at the young Alpha kindly. "I would not, son. Your Grace. I told her once that Ironvale was no place for a kingdom girl. She has been proving me wrong for 30 years. And I will tell you a thing you will not understand until you are my age. There is no better fortune in a man's life than to find a person he was wrong about. And to spend the rest of his life being wrong about her out loud. Let her split her wood." The young Alpha bowed. He walked on. Sable did not look up. She smiled. The same small patient smile she had smiled that first October morning. She set up another round. She swung. The axe came down clean. It is worth stopping the story here before we close it and asking what it was exactly that this Alpha King learned in 1 year of being wrong. Because he was a king. He had every reason not to bend. He had every excuse a man is given by his position, his history, his grief. He could have filed under Article 14. He could have taken her land into his own and called it protection. He could have carried the shape of his loss for Ren into a second marriage and let it deform a second Omega the way it had deformed him. Nobody in Ironvale would have blamed him. Half of them would have called it wisdom. He did not. He did the harder thing, which was to notice in real time that his certainty was a wound and not a truth, and to let the wound be seen, first to himself, then to her. That is the first lesson this story keeps for the men who watch stories like this one, which is that a man who cannot admit he was wrong is not stronger than a man who can. He is only more afraid of what admitting costs him. And what it costs him most of the time is nothing he could not afford to lose. The second lesson is about the wound. Torian did not look at Sable and see contempt. He looked at her and saw Ren. That was not cruelty. That was grief wearing his eyes for him. Every man in his 60s knows, if he is honest, how often his hardness with a stranger is really a bandage he has put on some old thing that never healed. There is no shame in the bandage. There is only shame in refusing when the moment comes to take it off. The third lesson is the one about the difference between saving and sharing. Torian came out to save her. He learned to share her country instead. Those are not the same word. A man who insists on saving a person he loves is telling that person, without meaning to, that he does not believe in her. A man who shares with the person he loves is telling her that he sees her whole. The love that grows out of the second telling is the love that lasts. The love that grows out of the first telling is the love that withers a bright woman by inches in a house shut against a wind until the fever comes. The fourth lesson is about the coat. Sable Ashwin walked off a coach in Ironvale in an Ashenreach cloak. Every alpha who saw her that first day priced her by the cloak. Torian priced her by the cloak. He was wrong. He was wrong the way most of us are wrong most of the time about most of the people we pass in a market. Judgment by what someone is wearing, by how they speak, by where they came from, by the softness of their hands, is the cheapest kind of thinking. Costs nothing. And what it robs us of over a lifetime is every single person who might have taught us a thing we did not know yet. How many people in your own life have you priced by their coat? How many of them, if given the chance you almost did not give them, might have taught you something you needed to know? I would like to hear the answer. If you have a story of your own, a person you were wrong about or a person who was wrong about you and had to eat those words later, leave it in the comments below. I will read every one of them, because stories like that are the ones that keep me writing stories like this. And take care of your wood pile. Word count metric, 5,081 words.